Hi guys. I hope you are having a good day. Um, Today I'm going to be talking about bacteria. So we've talked a little bit about bacteria already when we talked about the tree of life. Of course, they form kind of the base of the tree of life. They were the earliest organisms. They are all prokaryotic. As you see here, there's not a lot of organization in the cell. It's just some DNA, some cytoplasm, ribosomes, of course, but not really much else because they're prokaryotic. And since bacteria were the first organisms on Earth, they were also the inventors of a lot of processes that we've talked about so far this year. So bacteria, first of all, they are the supreme chemists. They live everywhere on Earth. They help with cloud formation. They, of course, were the originators of photosynthesis and respiration, the free-living prokaryotes that got sort of eaten by the larger prokaryotic cells, but then took over photosynthesis in the case of chloroplasts and respiration in the case of the mitochondria. They also are able to get energy in other ways. So we've talked about some that live at the very bottom of the ocean down in the volcanic vents, and they are chemoautotrophs, so they can use chemical energy rather than light energy to produce ATP. They also were the first communicators. So although their cells are simple in structure, they are able to send signals from cell to cell and make these big cell-to-cell networks and tell each other where to find food or different things like that. They also have these special little DNA rings, basically, called plasmids. And they're able, through these pili, these little, like, sticking out things, to exchange those little rings of DNA from one bacteria to another. And exchanging genetic information in that way was the beginning of sexual reproduction. So even though that's not the main way they reproduce, they were the inventors. They were the first movers. So many of them have flagella, so they can move themselves towards chemical signals that might signal food. There are also kinds of bacteria called spirochetes. You'll see them in a minute, but they're sort of spiral shaped and they corkscrew kind of through the water. If you've ever swam corkscrew, you know what I'm talking about. And if you just kind of imagine like something spiraling through the water. Bacteria we saw in the video, the keepers of the biosphere. They are everywhere. So SAR-11, that bacteria that was discovered by Giovannoni from OSU, it has been discovered in every body of water on Earth. 95% of marine biomass, so of all the living stuff in the ocean, if you put it on a big giant scale, 95% of it would be bacteria. That's so wild. It's just a huge, huge quantity of bacteria in the ocean. And I've told you this last thing I've told you before, but I'll tell you again. There are 10 times more bacterial cells on you than there are you cells, which is totally wild. But we rely on them for tons of things. So without bacteria, we would be sunk, as you saw in Biosphere 2. Bacteria have several things in common. They're all prokaryotes, so they have a cell wall around the very outside, then a cell membrane inside of that. Their cytoplasm has tons of enzymes to do all of their biochemical processes, metabolism, and so on. They have ribosomes, because ribosomes take the DNA code and turn it into proteins like enzymes. And they have a circular chromosome, a big circular chromosome that has all of their DNA. And then they reproduce by what's called binary fission. It's asexual reproduction, so they're just growing and splitting. So each new bacteria is identical to the old bacteria. And that's part of why they can reproduce so quickly. We saw in the lab that, they grew for 2 days, and these things that you couldn't see with your eye turned into huge colonies that you could easily see. So you can reproduce very quickly because of that. And that's something all bacteria have in common, that simple structure and that same basic method of reproduction. They are classified, and this should be very familiar to you. If we're using the kingdom system of classification, so that's where you have the 5 kingdoms. The first one was Monera, so that's sort of everything prokaryotic within one kingdom. If we use the domain system, Carl Wose's system, then remember that because there are so many bacteria that do so many different things, they actually were split into 2 groups that make up, a huge amount of the tree of life. So the bacteria branch as well as the archaea branch both encompass these prokaryotic organisms. And those are the only 2 that are prokaryotic. The last branch is all eukaryotic organisms. Bacteria, just like really all kinds of living things, they're all small, but they do have a pretty wide range of size. So they average about 10 microns, 10 micrometers, which is 0.01 millimeters. I'm doing that right. On the very small side, and I think they talked in the movie about this bacterium being particularly small because it's living on a very low food environment. So on the small side is SAR11. That's the microbe that was talked about in the video. And it is just 1 micron or 1 micrometer in size. So you can see the scale. Here's 1 micron, and that's about 1 micron. So it's very, very small. It lives everywhere. And it can survive off just very small amounts of food. The large side of bacteria, this one is just crazy to me. It's 0.75 millimeters. So you can imagine on a ruler, you could see 0.75 millimeters with your eye. So it's crazy that it's a bacteria. So this bacteria is called Thiomargarita namibiensis. Notice, as we've talked about before, this is the genus name and the species name. It's italicized. The genus is capitalized. The species is lowercase. So make sure when you're working on your microbe project that you're using that naming convention. So anyway, this bacteria is ginormous. You could see it with your eye. You can see it right there on that. I think it's a fly. But it's wild. So this Thiomargarita namibiensis means sulfur pearl of Namibia. And you can see why they might think it looks like a pearl, because it's, I don't know, it's round and it's sort of whitish. So, I don't know. It's a cool bacterium because it's so big. So, bacteria, as we said, they're very small, they're structurally rather simple, and so they're hard to identify just by looking at them. If you think back to what you saw through the microscope on Friday, there wasn't probably a whole lot of variety. But there are some ways that we can tell bacteria apart just by looking at them. So bacteria come in 3 major shapes. Cocci, which are spherical. Those are the purple ones.
Cocci are the purple ones?
Yes. So this is streptococcus, if you've had strep throat. Bacillus.
Which one's streptococcus?
The purple ones.
Oh.
Okay. Lactobacillus is an example of a bacillus, a rod-shaped bacterium, or sort of a oval shape. And then the blue one is Spirilla, and syphilis is our example of that. So those are the ones that can kind of spiral through the water as they swim.
Those ones?
Mm-hmm. That was Benjamin saying hello to you all. So bacteria, as I've said, they're structurally very simple. Ribosomes, DNA, cell membrane, cell wall. But within that simplicity of structure, they are incredibly complex biochemically. And so because they can do a whole lot of different biochemical reactions, they come in a wide variety of types. So one way that we can group them is by the way they get their nutrition, just like we group, plants versus animals by the way they get their nutrition. There are likewise bacteria that are autotrophic and bacteria that are heterotrophic. So autotrophic means self-feeder. You might remember that from earlier. Self-feeder. So there are photosynthetic cyanobacteria. So they have pigments that can take the energy from the sun and convert it into usable chemical energy in their bodies. There are also chemosynthetic bacteria. Often they are hyperthermophiles. So they love heat, really high temperatures. And they form the base of the food chain at the ocean bottom. So, so they're using chemical energy rather than sunlight. They do a similar thing. They make their own food from that, and then they are being used by other organisms to get energy down in that very dark, deep part of the ocean. There are also heterotrophic bacteria. So these are bacteria that have to eat food. So they can be free living, just sort of, I don't know, I imagine them swimming around, eating food. There are saprophytic bacteria, so those are decomposers. So they'll be on dead things. And then there are a variety of bacteria that can live in symbiosis with other organisms. So the ones that live in your gut, for instance, have a mutualistic relationship. So it's mutually beneficial. You benefit because the microbes help, make vitamins, help absorb nutrients, and the microbe benefits because they have a nice, warm place to live. Some bacteria can be parasites, where they live off an organism and the organism is harmed. And And then there's some that are in what are called commensal relationships, where the bacteria benefits, but the host just like isn't harmed, but doesn't really help. It's just kind of meh, just there. So there are a lot of different nutritional strategies in bacteria land. So one relationship that we are probably most familiar with is when bacteria are pathogenic, and we're most familiar because that's been studied the longest, probably because it's a concern to us as humans. So here's some examples. We have streptococcus, which causes strep throat. That's how it gets its name. Staphylococcus, which can cause a staph infection. MRSA is one particularly bad because it's resistant strain of staph. And then anthrax, what you see here, was, if it's inhaled, it can cause, well, anthrax, but it can be fatal if it's inhaled. Luckily, it's rare and very well regulated. The bacteria that we often don't think about as much, although that's starting to change more and more as we understand it better, are the beneficial bacteria. So they help with our digestion. They help with our immune system. They can protect against bad microbes, those pathogenic microbes we just saw. They're used industrially in food production. So if you eat like yogurt or cheese, those are made by bacteria. They also, if you have an antibiotic, your doctor might instruct you to eat some yogurt because it has those good microbes in it, hoping to kind of make sure that your microbiome, your own beneficial bacteria stay populating your digestive tract. Bacteria also are important for what's called nitrogen fixation. So they can take nitrogen from the air, which is N2, two nitrogen atoms bonded together, and they can help convert it into a form that living things can use. Because we need nitrogen for proteins and for nucleic acids, but most living things can't take the N2 from the air and break it apart because it's bonded really tightly together. Luckily, we have these bacteria that are able to do that for us. Bacteria have been modified in order to serve some biotechnological purposes. So insulin, for instance, used to have to be collected from other mammals. And then if a person, was diabetic and needed insulin, that's what they would be given. But now scientists have been able to take the insulin-producing genes from humans and grow bacteria that can produce that insulin for them. So it's real human insulin rather than from another animal. They can also, because they're metabolically so diverse, they can even be used to clean up some toxic waste. Some bacteria can survive on lots of different chemicals, and so we can use them to kind of eat up chemical spills, which is pretty amazing. So, thank you, Microcosmos, for all of the wonderful things that you do for us. Okay, have a good day. Bye.